So it is Monday, the 16th of July, 2018. I want to welcome you to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people. We'll look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and look forward to our ongoing battles for autonomy and our free and independent existence. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and simulcast on the Gwe, that's CKWE in Tyendinaga. You can find us at www.ltnradionet.com, and of course we are streaming live here on Facebook. I'm John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer, and I've got Jake Proud on the board, and I'm solo in the studio on mic, so we'll pick it up. Look, we had some disturbing news here. I live on the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation, for those who may be listening for the first time. And it was not a good week. Look, I know the world is concentrating about the moron U.S. president and some of the stupid things he's doing in his world travel, but I'm more concerned about stuff closer to home. And like I said, some disturbing news. We had a loss of a life of a young man. I heard another disturbing story about somebody who's not a young man, somebody who's mid-age, a drug dealer in the community, and somebody who has had forced sexual relations with a young girl. And so it begs me the question: do we have community standards? What are our community standards? Do we have any? And where do we apply them, and how do we apply them? I mean, if not community standards, what's our standards that we have even within our own family? I'm concerned about the social degradation in across the world, for that matter. But from a Native standpoint, I see this being one of the underlying problems that has a role to play in everything from the suicide issue to the substance abuse issue to the missing and murdered Indigenous women's issues to our economic woes. I mean, all of it. And so we have this breakdown in, like I said, social standards. And in some of it, and I've heard people say, well, we can't tell people what to do. And then it almost gets tied into this sense, well, we're Native people, we're sovereign, we're free. We get to do what we want to do on our territories, and we don't care about how somebody else judges us from a social standards. But that's not really our culture. Our culture does involve us having standards within our families. I mean, expectations. And I'm not saying that these are harsh standards or that there's some sort of harsh penalty for not towing the line on these standards. But there still has to be standards nonetheless. I mean, if you raise your children, do you tolerate bad behavior? Or do you make excuses for bad behavior? Do you defend your children at all costs? I mean, what if your child does something really, really bad, hurts somebody else? Do you defend your child's actions, or do you do you still love your child and support your child the best you can, but understand that your child may have, may have committed some terrible, heinous crime against somebody? And maybe it's not your child. Maybe it's your nephew, your cousin, your uncle, your parents. How do we deal with these standards, or do we just look the other way? I mean, look, when I think about somebody. I mean, I'm that I coached in sports when my son was playing sports here on the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation. When I see a child, look, I know he's a grown man in his 30s, but when I see somebody whose life has ended in tragedy, and it didn't end because of a car crash, it ended because of a lifestyle choice. And a lifestyle choice that was not of his own design. So this is where I get back to the community standards. Look, I know a lot of people mourning and are grieving. Yeah, and the sad part is there's probably a few people out there saying, "Well, I'm going to drink to our dear friend who we lost this weekend." They're going to drink to their dear friend, and they lost him to drinking. And I wonder, as a people, as a community, and again, this goes to all communities, but certainly I'm talking about where I live right now. Do we hold ourselves accountable? Do we understand? Do we accept some complicity if we partied with somebody before they that led to their death? I mean, whether it's a heroin overdose or whether it's just prolonged, substance abuse or alcohol abuse, do we hold ourselves accountable? Do we accept our role? Look, I'm not saying that that I'm not pointing the finger at one or two individuals here. I'm not doing that at all. I'm saying it as a community. And then getting to the other story, the story about this guy who may or may not have raped a young girl. Where does it leave the rest of us? I mean, the disturbing part, and I posted this on Facebook, and I'm not going to name names of any sort here on the show, but I looked on Facebook and I have 162 mutual friends with this known coke dealer, somebody who is known for abusing women, has 3, 4, I don't know how many more baby mamas out there, doesn't really has not exactly demonstrated himself in any way, shape, or form as a responsible father, let alone partner. And he's with a girl who looks like a child right now. And maybe she's 18 years old, but he's 50. She looks 15, which is the age, from what I understand, of the girl that he sexually assaulted. So, what is that standard? I mean, so when I think about those 162 mutual friends, look, I know that I've got, a friends list that I don't know the character of everybody on that list. But having said that, I am not committed enough to any of those people on Facebook, even family for that matter, to make that kind of public validation of my relationship with somebody, knowing or even suspecting this kind of bad behavior. I mean, we talk about the Me Too movement or missing and murdered Indigenous women, and yet within our own communities, we tolerate a behavior that is life-threatening. I mean, it's life-threatening to self, and it's life-threatening to the people who become the victims of some of these behaviors. So again, I ask the question: what are our community standards, and how do we assert them? I know the first thing in any Native community is to say, "Well, what's the tribal council going to do about it?" Or the other question is, "Well, what about law enforcement?" Well, if it's outside law enforcement, how are we dealing with the issue? I mean, we're just deferring, saying, "Oh, CPS should be investigating this 15-year-old who was raped." Well, maybe they should be, but do we defer all that to somebody else, to some agency? I mean, there's a town, I think in Oakland, California, where even the politicians are saying, it's time that we put a higher standard on our willingness to call the cops. After all these, people of color, who are constantly having the cops called on, whether it's the two Native boys in Colorado University, or whether it's, the black family barbecuing, or whatever. I mean, just this whole idea that, that you've got, I don't know, fragile white people calling the cops on issues that are certainly unnecessary for cops. But again, whether we think that it's necessary or not, what's the standard that we have for resolving conflict? I mean, I remember a few years back at the pool here on the territory, we were becoming inundated with people from the outside. People who didn't live here on territory. And finally, a friend of mine, one of the guys on council, just confronted him. No, they didn't call the marshals. They didn't call the cops. They didn't do all their stuff. He just said, look, you're not welcome here. If you're here with a guest, who's the one who brought you? And, so, the issue got dealt with directly. But in that situation, it seems like we have a double standard on our territory. Man, we'll hold some people to the highest standard for an indiscretion that may warrant some scrutiny. Don't get me wrong. but they pale by comparison to a known drug dealer on the territory, somebody who is, there's a few people who are known here probably on every territory who are responsible, at least indirectly, if not directly, for the deaths of people because of this heroin and opiate, again, what's called an epidemic. But we also, I've heard people say, well, part of being native is drinking. Like it's a rite of passage or something like that. So these are the questions that, and I've come back to it. I've talked about it here on the show before, but I continuously circle back to this. What are our standards? And because I have heard people say, well, we can't tell people what to do. And I'm thinking, why? That was even a conversation associated with a longhouse where there were people who were using, not necessarily ceremonies, so I won't necessarily go there, but certainly sings, these sings where people come in from all different communities to participate, and they're using them as as the opportunity to snag young girls that are coming in from out of town, and there was actually some wide open drinking going on. Not just here. I'm not picking on Seneca territory. This was happening at the at Onondaga. It was all over Facebook. Somebody posted some videos of some knockdown, drag out, drunken brawls taking place after a sing at Onondaga. And Onondaga is supposed to be this shining example of Haudenosaunee, supposedly. But when I asked the question of people within the Longhouse, well, why don't you say something to the people who are doing this stuff? So, well, we can't tell people what to do. Yeah, you can. You can say, look, if you're going to be a part of this community, the Longhouse community, we have a standard. And some of these communities are Handsome Lake communities, are Longhouses, where the drinking is specifically prohibited according to their standards. And yet, are we again, is this somehow what we've become? And did we become this because of outside influence? Because this isn't a part of our culture, folks, in any of our communities. When people said, well, there's an old African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. No, that's not just that. I don't even know if it really is an African proverb, but it's one of ours. We've always viewed the role of a community, aunts and uncles. And when we say aunts and uncles, we just don't mean the brothers and sisters of the parents of a child. We're talking about the people, the adults of a child's parents' age anyway, who have a responsibility to these children. In our marriage ceremony, we talk about, we ask the parents of these two people putting up, are they ready? And then we ask the two people who are about to be joined, when you call your child in, when you have children and you call your child in after playing, will you call in his friends as well, her friends as well? And will you wash their faces and hands as you feed your child? That's the standard that we're supposed to have according to our culture, right? Now, I know where it's gone, and part of it went awry because of assimilation, because of jurisdictional questions. Look, we've had everything from the Thomas Indian School and, of course, the residential schools in general that created a very low standard to rip kids away from parents. And we, at some level, we went along. And even now, as we confront that history, and we are pretty good at confronting some of that history. We confront the history, but we don't confront the present and the effects of that history on the present. So that's the question that I have. And so when people talk about, freedom, I have a right to do this. Look, one of my friends, Dago Rundage, Paul Delaron says, we want to talk about rights, but we don't want to talk about responsibilities. So again, when I ask that question, what are our community standards? What are our responsibilities? What responsibilities do we have and I'm not just saying as a, what's the responsibility that a Seneca has in Seneca territory, but all of us who live in this community. I mean, there are non-Senecas, there are non-enrolled Senecas, there are non-natives, but we should still have a broad general sense of not just a standard, but a responsibility that we all have in a community. I mean, we should not let children be at risk. And look, we've had a couple of children who were killed in this community or within these couple of communities. We had a couple of children who lost their lives. And some of that was lifestyle associated. Alcohol, partying. And of course, the other thing that happens is you have so many broken homes. I mean, you have so many homes that, that we have a woman who's, got children by so many different men, or you got a man who's got children by so many different women. And so you have these broken, fractured family units. I mean, and of course we don't utilize any of our traditional processes, the clan. I mean, what we forget is that within our culture, we are a culture of communication. And we talked about it with Ed just the other day, diplomacy. But we're people that counsel, and that's with an S, COUNSEL. When we talk about that fire is a symbol of our family, but it's also a symbol of not just holding a council, but it's a symbol of a place that you can embrace those who will join you, and to counsel each other, to talk to each other. I mean, it's a real tragedy when you hear somebody, who perished in a alcohol-related car accident, or you hear of somebody who perished in any kind of alcohol-related domestic violence. Most domestic violence happens on our territories. I mean, 70% of the domestic violence that women experience is from non-natives on our territories, and this is by and large, on territories that are fairly remote, where there's again it's really hard to enforce or to make sure that that our women are protected. But if I tell you that 70% of the violence against women is perpetrated by non-natives, that still means that 30% are our own men within a community. And I've asked this question before. If you know your buddy is beating the crap out of his his wife or his partner and his children, do you look the other way? If your son is doing it, if your son is abusing his his domestic partner, do you say that she asked for it? Or she really knows how to push his buttons. Look, I get that. I understand that some women can be tough to live with, but you don't beat the crap out of them. The same guy that I was talking about, who a coke dealer who raped a 15-year-old. It was just a couple of years ago, and I know the woman that he did this to. Again, alcohol related, beat the crap out of her, and this is in the middle of winter. And then threw her outside, left her in the snow outside. She's lucky she didn't die. And this is a big guy. This isn't some 5'5" guy who, who a woman has a chance to defend herself. This is a guy who's, 6 foot, 6'3", 6'2", 6'3", probably goes 300 pounds or better. Posts pictures of him flexing on his Facebook page. I get frustrated because I feel strongly about defending women and children in particular. It is, and look, we've many a parent or a grandparent face, are confronted with these issues because of their children or even their grandchildren. And I'm not immune, to some of that, to having to experience some of that myself. But I'm not going to look the other way. I'm also not while I won't bail on my own children or grandchildren, I'm also not going to defend their bad behavior. I'm going to call them out on it. I mean, I've always told when my kids, I mean, even when they were approaching that age where you had to worry about things like alcohol consumption, I said, look, I'm never giving you permission to do this. I don't care even if you're of age. I don't approve. But by the same token, if you ever find yourself in a circumstance, I expect the call. I don't care if it's 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. Because even if I'm pissed, and even if I feel like I've got to give you a lecture or worse, I want you home safe. And when I told my kids that, I said, and that goes for your friends too. So if the phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning and somebody needs a ride someplace, I mean, I'm going to make sure I'm not being punked. But I would rather help somebody than read about them in the paper, over the next couple of days or attend their funeral. Look, we do have a responsibility to each other. I don't care if people want to argue that point. I don't care if people want to suggest that we have no right. We have no right to call people out on stuff. I beg to differ. We not only have a right to do it, we have a responsibility to do it. Look, I know we're all human beings and we can all make mistakes and we all make bad judgments from time to time, self-included. But something's got to change in the way we live our lives. I mean, when I use that word community, if we have no standards, then we really have no community. We just share geography. I mean, that's not a community. A community is caring. Community is caring for each other and caring for each other's kids and all of that. And I know, look, this may sound hokey. I mean, and I get that. And, and I don't want to come across as a prude. Look, I've got my past and I've got skeletons, not as late as thick as some of you do. But I've always tried to conduct my life with some sense of responsibility and standards, especially to my family and especially to the community that I'm a part of. And yeah, there's some people who get pissed because of my involvement in community. Some people get pissed because of the things that I talk about. But then I hear some people say, I'm glad I'm glad somebody said that. The problem that I have with where I live is understanding the nature of things when you're not, I'm Gonjagahaga. I'm Ongweongwe, but I'm not an enrolled Seneca living on the Seneca territory of Cattaraugus. So I know there are some that would say, well, we don't need to hear this from this guy. And that's why you won't hear me calling out the names. But I'll stand with the Senecas who do. I mean, I don't know how many times I heard people say, well, we all know who the drug dealers are on the territory. No, we don't all know. You know if you're saying that. Look, publish a list, and I'll share that list. Let's call it out. Let's hold people accountable. And even if your kids are on that, one of the things that people say, well, there's some of these people are politically connected. You know what? In most of our communities, everybody is somewhat connected. Because even if your mother or uncle or grandmother or somebody isn't sitting on council, you might be supplying somebody whose mother, uncle, or grandparent is sitting on council. And look, this plague that has taken lives, that has taken health, that has taken children, it affects everybody. It affects people who are on tribal council. It affects, some of the millionaire business owners. And it affects those who, live paycheck to paycheck. This is a problem that we are all confronted with at some point. Even if we're confronted with it by people we don't know. I know we've seen in a few territories where people have been hit alongside the road, stumbling home drunk at night. I'll admit, I'm one of the ones who will stop and I'll give somebody a ride. I'll risk the vomit in the seat. Honestly, I will, because the alternative is something that concerns me. I'm not saying I'm riding around looking for people to give rides to. But man, I mean, it's real easy to feel terrible when tragedy strikes, but it's striking every single day. When we talk about the drug problem, for instance, look, we break it down into three classes of problem on a territory when it comes to either they're a user and the addiction has put them in a situation where they probably need treatment. So they are a victim of their circumstance, and regardless of how people feel about law enforcement and all of that, first and foremost, somebody who's got an addiction probably needs help. And then, of course, there are the dealers. I don't have a whole lot of compassion for the people who are dealing, even though some of those dealers are dealing to either get enough product to satisfy their own addiction. I understand the addiction issue, but now it's not a victimless crime. Now you're enrolling people, you're enlisting people in your addiction problem. So you've got users and you've got dealers, but then there's those people who are on the cusp, who probably aren't addicted yet. Maybe they've even tried it a few times, but they're only 14, 15 years old. Their brains haven't even developed in terms of understanding the repercussions, the consequences of their decisions yet. Look, I know, yeah, but girls say they mature faster. No, they don't. Their bodies might, but their brains don't. We all have the same issues with our brains. So the repercussions, of our actions, the consequences, that doesn't even really start to have again, scientifically, from studies and of psychology and anatomy. I mean, they're doctors saying that part of the brain isn't fully developed until 18 or 19 years old. So it is real easy to be reckless when you're 12 or 13 or 14, especially if your parenting guidance is flawed, and I'm being real generous with that expression. So if you're 15 years old and nobody cares if you're out drinking till 3 o'clock in the morning, the chances are you're going to be out drinking till 3 o'clock in the morning, or worse. You may be hanging out with, and look, there's any number of guys. Obviously, the guy that I'm talking about here is 50 years old. Doesn't matter what age they are. And look, like I said, they'll use, even parts of our culture as the foundation. They'll use, events, social events, socials at the Longhouse. They'll use, lacrosse games. They'll use parties down at the beach, whatever, as a means to suck these young girls in. And, of course, the young girls don't just get sucked in, the young boys do too. And then they see the standard by that, then they see the community standard, that there isn't any. Or the standard is that's a successful guy, the guy dealing cocaine and heroin, and the guy who's willing to buy 12 packs and 24 packs and that kind of stuff for 15-year-olds. That's how you earn friends. That's how you win friends and influence others, right? Look, we're at the bottom of the hour. We're going to take a break and then come back. But, man, this is the conversation we need to have, folks. So I'm having it here. I'm John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I'll be right back.
red blues, red blues, red blues, baby, red blues. Every kind of people got every kind of blues, but a red man's got red blues. Go to work every day for that minimum wage. There's a guy, blonde hair, blue eyes, just about your age. Hasn't worked that is half as long as you. He makes twice as much money as you do. Red blues, red blues, red blues, baby, red blues. Every kind of people got every kind of blues, but red man's got red blues. After work, I go home, make myself a drink, grab a glass, a few ice cubes, walk on over to the sink. My old lady says that I ought not to. You'll get sick if you drink.
All right. Thanks for coming back. Hey, we're talking Res Blues here. We aren't talking just Res Booze. Okay? I mean, look, we have a lot of challenges, folks. And looking at the challenges that we are confronted by oppression from the outside. And, you know, that's kind of where this alcohol and drug problem come from. We don't produce alcohol here on territory. We don't produce the drugs here. So if you think like the outside cops are the solution, law enforcement's the solution, you don't think they know you don't think they know who brings, you know, the cocaine and the heroin and fentanyl onto our territories? Of course they do. That's their job. And they know. But you know what? As long as it's only coming to a black community or a community of color, a native territory, a reservation, it's better that stuff happen there. And that's, you know, and the reality is, the reason this opiate issue is now being called an epidemic, and it's being called a crisis, and it's all about treatment, and now it's being called a disease. You know why? Because white people are going through it now. It's not the crack cocaine in the black communities anymore. It's not the alcohol consumption in native communities. Now it's heroin in Lancaster, in Amherst. So now, you know, that it's viewed differently. But you know what? And that's where the concentration is. We'll deal with it. You know, we got to confront this stuff in the white communities. In the meantime, our communities struggle with this stuff, even though we don't produce any of the stuff here. You know, this is... So when we talk about... When Murray Porter sings about Res Blues, that's about the challenges from the outside and how we stand up against it and how we confront it, how we acknowledge that that we are still victims of oppression and genocide from the outside. Hey, look, before I get too far along, let me go ahead and thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank ERW, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Legacy 420 in Tandanega. I want to thank Mike General with Mikey G's and Mikey's Emporium. And I want to thank my good friends, Ed Schindler, who isn't here with me this evening, but guys like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice, Roger Jock, Neville Spring. These are guys who make contributions from time to time. They enable me to do the show. But, you know, many of you who have helped the show in the past have enabled me to continue to educate, inform, and entertain even over the last 8 years. We're in our 9th year now. So I want to thank all of you for stepping up and doing your part, being a part of the fight. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. And again, I want to thank CKWE, The Gway, in Tandanega for the simulcast and the rebroadcast of the show, as well as our internet partners, Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio, and all of you who allow us to share the show on your group pages. Hey, look, the other thing, beyond what we do here live, we post the shows on SoundCloud. They are podcasts. And look, if you go online, if you just search Let's Talk Native podcast, you'll come up with any number of ways that you can listen to shows, and you can select them. You can select them by number, by date, and usually enough of a description there so you know what the topic was. So the podcast can be listened to anytime. We post the videos up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. So you can see the videos of the shows there. And and some of these subjects are really, really important. And this one is important. And it's a shame that it's almost hard to talk about it until there's a tragedy. The tragedies are what makes kind of makes the point. So when we see, a tragic car accident, especially, look, I didn't hear too much during this graduation season, but, and I know we're still kind of in it a little bit. There's nothing more frustrating to see kids who are, out there celebrating having graduated from high school and then being snuffed out because they're driving in an alcohol-related accident, and and there's loss of life and that kind of stuff. These tragedies just bring it home over and over and over again. And the problem is the standards that we let go in our own communities. That low standard creeps in to our lives, even when we try to step up. When we all rush out to Standing Rock or wherever, Wounded Knee, or to Ganawage or Ganazadage, or to a pipeline fight. There are some that are going there with the intention of hooking up. Red Fawn Phallus hooked up, and she got set up. This pretty boy Native guy who was turning all the Native girls' heads turned out to be a federal informant and set her up. She's serving almost 5 years altogether for the discharge of his gun when they came to arrest her. So the fact that we've allowed ourselves to devolve as a people socially, even when we step up to try to do social good, it creeps in. It creeps in. Our egos, male dominant society, patriarchy, it creeps in. This whole sense of, assimilation, indoctrination, and all that stuff, it creeps in. Creeps into our everyday life, and it creeps in even when we're trying to raise our standards and stand up for something that we feel strongly about. Look, I'm not saying every protest, every act of resistance is mired in this stuff completely, but there's elements of it. Like I said, we've got people who will show up at a social, fully expecting that they're gonna get drunk afterwards, and they're gonna turn that party into who knows what. I've heard example after example of rapes that have taken place after these things. And and look, the story that I opened up with, this idea of a 50-year-old man raping a 15-year-old, there's no such thing as consensual sex between a 15-year-old and a 50-year-old. Not just because of that thing I told you about repercussions and the brain not being developed, but there's no way that anybody can accept that a 15-year-old, tiny little girl was somehow not being coerced with both drugs and the sheer massive size of this guy into submission. And I've said this before on a number of issues. Submission is not consent. Let me say it again. Submission is not consent. And that's not just a sex thing here, folks. There are many times throughout our history that we've had to concede. Conceding is not the same thing as consenting. So the idea that we've had to relent or surrender, and I don't mean in terms of conquest or whatever else. I mean, I've talked about this notion of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. I mean, when that got passed in 1924, our people, cried foul. They stood up. They spoke out against this thing. But over time, we didn't necessarily consent to it, but we submitted to it. I mean, even recently, I talked about the Haudenosaunee passport issue. Look, when the standards got raised for what white people, or what the Whitey system was, the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative standards for travel documents, when that got raised, there were plenty of Native people who said, I'm just going to go get a passport, U.S. passport or Canadian passport. In fact, I saw an article, one of the articles that on this whole Iroquois National thing suggested that, these guys all were trying to travel on Haudenosaunee passports, even though they've got Canadian passports. I mean, the article said the Iroquois all have Canadian passports. That's not true. But I'll bet there was a fair percentage of the Iroquois nationals that do have Canadian or U.S. passports. So if you already have those, and now you're gonna try to say the standard is no, I'm going to use my own travel documents. Well, the problem with using a Canadian or U.S. passport is the idea that you have to you have to consent to the imposition of their citizenship on you. Submission is not consent. So when you are facing an oppressive situation, whether it's a sexual predator or whether it's a settler colonial power that is trying to take our lands or trying to take our identity or trying to denationalize us, we resist it to the extent that we can. And even if we must give the appearance of a submission, we must never consent to their dominance. So the whole idea of living to fight another day. So I mean, that's obviously if you're a victim of rape, at some point you have to relent. Especially if you've got a very powerful man trying to threaten you and beat you. But that's not consent. And even if you think that you can't cry rape because in your mind, you did have consensual sex at one time. And if you're 15 years old, you cannot have consensual sex with a 50-year-old. It doesn't work that way. You're a child. You don't have the intellectual capacity to have had consensual sex with somebody with a sexual predator. That's just not the way it works. But if you have had consensual sex with somebody, that doesn't mean that they have a free reign over you. I heard somebody say, if you're a prostitute, can you be raped? Yes, of course you can. I heard somebody ask that question on Facebook the other day. A woman has a right to say no. And a man has a right to say no. And a child, they don't have to say no. It is no. It is just no. There's no such thing as consent from somebody who has been drug-induced, alcohol-induced, or underage. So I return to our original question. What are our community standards? And do we have any? And if we do have them, then how do we assert them? And look, and I'm not trying to create an oppressive situation. I'm not trying to establish a written code of conduct carved in stone. But as parents, and I'm a grandparent now. I don't know that I'm not comfortable calling myself an elder, but I guess by many standards I am. I'm going to be 59 years old this year. We do have a responsibility to, for one thing, use the years of experience that our eyes have allowed us to witness and our bodies have witnessed to say, look, there's a cost to this. Look, the cost that we see on our health, mental health, physical health, community health is striking. It's dramatic. It's tragic. So what do we do? I mean, how do we? I'll tell you what we do. The first thing you do is you hold the people closest to you. So the first thing you do is you hold your own children accountable. You hold your own nieces and nephews accountable. You hold your brother and your sister accountable, your aunt and your uncle. Look, I know it's hard to tell a complete stranger how to behave. Although, if that complete stranger is a rapist within your community, you shouldn't have to wait until one of your family members is a victim. Two tragedies, that I've heard about, and I don't know when this alleged rape incident took place. I don't know, but I do know that this community suffered a loss, and I'll tell you, I remember when that young man was still underage, playing lacrosse, and I remember them going to provincials, and their coach buying them booze. Man, these guys came out. My son was on the team. These guys came out and played like champs in the first day, and the next day they were just trashed. They were all hungover, and it was a coach, a person who was of age, who furnished these 14 and 15-year-olds with alcohol. Oh yeah, it's rite of passage. Yeah, we're gonna make men out of them. No, you made losers out of them on that day. That's what you did. And you began or contributed to a pattern that would follow some all the way to the grave. Look, I'm not trying to point fingers at any specific individual, but as a community, we are all responsible. And we shouldn't look the other way because somebody's politically connected. We shouldn't look the other way because, or because we want to make excuses for somebody's hard life. Well, yeah, he does this and this and this, but he had a hard life. He didn't have a father growing up. Well, then maybe it's time we stepped up. So when we see a child at risk, a young man or a young woman at risk, we provide the void, perhaps, that, created by his own family. But to just look the other way and say, well, I know people. I got people within my own family that I think there's no way their lives cannot end in tragedy. There's just no way that they can dodge this time in and time out. Eventually, it catches up. And the sad part is, it seems sadder when it catches up early. When you see a 16-year-old killed in a car accident. Or when you see a 33-year-old die from alcohol consumption. But it's just as tragic when it's a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old. Because those guys are parents. And their behavior is being, pushed on to another generation. My buddy Ed will tell a story about how he was watching a bunch of kids play. And they were using all the empty beer cans. And the little girl was picking up beer cans and putting it on a tray. And she was bringing it over to the little boys. And they were literally acting out What were they acting out? What they see every freaking weekend. That's what they were acting out. And you know what the little boy did? He shoved the tray away and knocked all the beer on. Said, get out of here with that stuff. This kid was already, at this young age, 7 years old. I don't know how old, but was already beginning to act out as an abuser. First as a alcohol abuser. Only acting out. They weren't drinking. They're just pretending they were. But he was already acting out as a domestic violence perpetrator. Man, if that's not heartbreaking, I don't know what the hell is. I don't know what is. So, again, the solution is to look close first. Look to the people who are closest to you. And you know what? It's love, it's tough love, it's a combination of all this stuff. We just can't throw away our kids. We can't let our buddies, because they're our friends or because they're fun. Oh yeah, I hunt with him. Yeah, we go ride 4-wheelers together. Yeah, he's a lot of fun until he gets drinking, then he can get mean. Well, then maybe you shouldn't drink with him. Maybe you shouldn't encourage the behavior. Maybe I shouldn't share 162 mutual friends with a guy who rapes 15-year-olds that he supplies coke to. Now, should I disown or should I, get rid of all those people on that friends list? Or should all the people on that friends list get rid of get rid of this guy? I don't know. I mean, look, that's just Facebook. I know it's superficial. It doesn't really mean that much, but it means something. Because what happens is we validate people's behavior. I mean, when we like somebody's picture of partying or drunken brawls or bad behavior. When I see a guy posting pictures of his 50-year-old self with a teenage girlfriend, thinking, really? You think that's appropriate? And maybe too many of you think that's okay. There is age appropriateness issues. I'm sorry, that's an issue. We should not be subjecting our daughters, our nieces, our granddaughters, our sisters to that kind of environment. So we should do everything we can to protect them. As a community, you got to ask the question: what are we going to do about drug dealers? What are we going to do about I mean, I don't even know what we do about people who kill. I mean, like I said, this community, there's a few individuals who are serving time right now for the death of children. Do they come back here? I mean, do we take this attitude? Oh yeah, they serve their time. Look, that's not our justice system. In fact, we can argue that's not even justice. That's crime and punishment on the outside. There's no restorative justice involved in this stuff. So, if our only standard is the white man's law and justice system that we know is anything but just, then again, I'm sorry, folks, that's assimilation and indoctrination. So when we have our conversation about decolonization, and then we say, well, the answer to this problem with children and child abuse is CPS. Is it really? What about the clan mothers? What about the other women? And what about the men who are willing to back the women up when it's time to take action on some of this stuff? Look, I know there's no easy solution to the harsh problems. But there are easy solutions to begin the process to confront those harsh problems. But I'll tell you, every time we look the other way, every time we pretend that it's none of my business. Look, my friend Paul tells a story when you heard the neighbor, beating his wife and you did nothing about it. And then you heard the neighbor beating his children and you did nothing about it. And then when your daughter marries the son of that abuser and then has to face the abuse from him, is it your problem then? I mean, so when do we confront this stuff? I mean, when do we think it's important enough that those children be protected? After they've already been subjected to the intergenerational trauma that's going to follow them around for one more generation? Or do we step up? This isn't just about the Me Too movement. It isn't just about the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue. It's about our communities. It's about our community standards. It's not about rights. It's about responsibilities. And that's the words from Degar Gay, and it's a sentiment that I feel very strongly about. But I also feel very strongly about the things that my friend Ed Schindler talked about the other day. Communication, statesmanship, counseling. How do we help people who are in trouble? Ignoring it is not helping it. And if you think, well, but it'd be harsh to confront somebody. Well, it's harsher not to. In the long run, I mean, and again, we're supposed to be the ones who are supposed to think 7 generations ahead. We're supposed to be concerned about those faces we'll never see. We can't pretend that 7 generations and those faces we'll never see, that we're somehow being responsible, that we're adopting that code of ethics, if we're ignoring the current generation or the next generation that we're looking at. If we're looking at our kids and our grandkids and doing nothing, then we just violated that whole sense of 7 generations. So look, you can dance at every longhouse, you can sing at every social, and you can have a closet full of ribbon shirts and Gustoas and fancy shawls. You can have all that stuff, but you're not living the culture if you're ignoring the responsibilities, and especially those responsibilities that we suggest are supposed to guide us, the 7 generations, the responsibility to those faces in front of us and beyond our ability to see those faces that we'll never see. We have a responsibility, and we need to step up to that responsibility. We need to understand that we've got to have standards within our family. We need to hold family members accountable. And then the more we extend that sense of standards and accountability and responsibility, once we go beyond our families, now we're into the community. But we should talk about it. I mean, shouldn't be a secret. This isn't about somebody trying to be a tough guy and confronting somebody on their doorstep. This is about a community upholding a sense of responsibility. I couldn't do a show ignoring what this community has faced. So this is my crack at it. We'll talk about it again, and we'll talk about it soon. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Thanks for joining me. Meowie.